I am very pleased to welcome you tonight. This is a London Center event here at the Union League Club, and a very special event because we will hear a good deal about what is happening in Egypt. And one of the very important things that has occurred is that if you've read the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you have been thoroughly misled on what is happening with the El-Sisi government in Egypt. It is a time to not only set the record straight, but for people to have an understanding and appreciation that we have a potential ally that we are sneering at. And so Tony, I think, will provide some background and tell you a little bit about his trip. Tony Shaffer is a remarkable man in many ways. His new book, which you should buy a copy of, by the way, the proceeds go to the London Center, but it's Tony's book, Operation Dark Heart, is a remarkable read. It's a great read, and so I recommend the book to you. Tony was the youngest clandestine officer in the CIA. He served undercover in Iraq, Afghanistan, and North Korea. So he's had extraordinary experience. He won the Bronze Star. He's been an amazing patriot for the United States. As remarkable as Tony's activities, of course, is the fact that we have a number of other interesting people who will be joining us at the London Center. And I urge you to take a look at the dates in that little brochure, which tell you about upcoming events. My dear friend Michael Mukasey, for example, on the 19th of February, will be speaking here at the Union League Club. You are all invited. I urge you to come. Michael is wonderful, and he'll be talking about the relationship between civil liberties and fighting the war against terror. And then on the 24th, Tony LaBianco. Tony, I saw you walk in. Tony LaBianco, one of the great actors in America. One of the truly great actors in America is doing a one-man performance of Little Flower on the 24th of February at the theater on 73rd Street and Lexington Avenue.
76th.
76th, thank you, I'm sorry. 76th Street and Lexington Avenue. You're all invited. The proceeds go to the London Center. They're all tax deductible because we are a 501c3. Please join us. Bring your friends. The theater holds 200 people. We don't have 200 people in this room, so you've got to bring others with you. But please come. I think it'll be a very enjoyable evening. And I can tell you, having seen this play twice, Tony is remarkable. He is absolutely remarkable. He becomes LaGuardia. In fact, there's one moment, and Tony, I shouldn't give this away. LaGuardia, as you know, had an Italian father and a Jewish mother. And he was running against a man on the Lower East Side. And during the course of the debates, this fellow who LaGuardia was running against said, he's not the genuine article. Because his father is Italian, his mother is Jewish. Is he really a Jew? So LaGuardia, at that point, had to give his speech. He stood up and he spoke for 20 minutes in Yiddish. Now, what's remarkable about Tony LaBianco in this play is that he speaks in Yiddish. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. So this is a treat. You must be there.
Not for 20 minutes, mind you.
But close, but he's remarkable. So please join us on that occasion. And then we have a number of other interesting events. Wally Ferris is going to be joining us. I'm going to persuade my friend Ken Abramowitz to do something for us. So we've got an interesting lineup, and I urge you to participate. If any of you are so inclined, you can write a check to the London Center for Policy Research. You can find out how to do that by looking in your brochure. But please join us at these events. It's very important. Now, my friend, Tony Shaffer. Tony, as I said, been with us now for about 6-7 months, has been to Egypt very recently. During the course of this trip to Egypt, he spent a good deal of time with the head of Central Intelligence in Egypt, Mr. Tahomi. Tahomi, is that how you pronounce his name? Tahomi, who is really the brains behind El-Sisi and the administration. Tahomi was the guy who was El-Sisi's mentor. He also went to the War College in the United States, understands the strategic dimensions of this new regime and what is going to happen. And one of the things that has been perfectly clear, and Tony will talk about this, is the reinforcement of the treaty with Israel. This government in Egypt today has said we will do everything in our power to work with Israel. We will prevent the war material going into Gaza, which has been the case up until this regime. And on top of it, we will clean out the Sinai, the incubator of what is arguably the most heavily armed area in the world for terrorism. So without further ado, my dear friend, the remarkable Tony Shaffer. Thank you very much.
Herb, thank you for those kind of comments. I'll talk without the microphone, if that's okay. To start with, an old boss of mine said, be funny, be brief, and be gone. Unfortunately, I can't do that tonight because you all expect me to talk in detail about stuff, so we'll go through things rapidly as we can. By the way, for those who would like one, I brought some books. Operation Dark Heart, as Herb said, it's got a lot of black marks in it, but if you take vinegar and put it on there, it develops.
Redacted by the CIA.
That's right. So, really, the real issue, just so you know, I went against President Obama's policy regarding Afghanistan. How to Win in Afghanistan is the last chapter of the book, so I've actually, when General Joe Dunford, the current commander, deployed, he called me in the Pentagon. We had an hour one-on-one where we talked about the book. So at least one general paid attention to it, so we'll see if that does anything. Anyway, I'm here tonight to talk about Egypt, and it's very interesting how Herb framed this, and I think it's the correct frame for this. You've all, if you've been watching any of the mainstream media, have been buffaloed about what's going on. This is not about the Army suppressing democratic process and democratic thought. It's about the Army trying to prevent one radical organization from becoming dominant. About 1 million people want to dominate 90 million. That's what's going on. And I think the reason that you've all not seen the truth is because a lot of the allies who support this group have actually been able to infiltrate our own system. Something called the Muslim Brotherhood, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. This is more representative of the Egyptians. This is from the man who announced the vote of the Constitution. He said, this is actually in Al Jazeera, believe it or not, don't worry about Egypt. It has special standing for God. It is mentioned in the Quran, the Bible, and the Torah. Remember, the heroes of your army, they have restored hope and our future to protect Egypt. Now let me read that again, that last line. They have restored hope. The army has restored hope in our future to protected Egypt. That's the attitude of the people. It's not that they're being suppressed like, thank God for the army. And if you think about it, it really rings true because General Field Marshal al-Sisi has actually talked about the fact that he's running for president. And everybody's worried, oh my God, if he runs, he's probably going to win. That is illustrative of the fact that the people support the army. The army, this was a popular uprising, so we'll look into that tonight. I was there in mid-December. Let's see, bio, we've already kind of got through all this. Mission. Well, one of the notable things I want to point out is as Herb talks about the mission. I think this is notable, and something I'll talk about more. So much of what happens today, I think, requires that you don't have think tanks that just think. I don't think we have that luxury, and I'll talk about why we don't have that luxury at the end of my briefing. I think and do think, and I'm very proud of the fact that Herb has allowed me to take off the gloves, so to speak, and go out and do things. And I think to be effective in policy, you're going to have to be a lot more interactive than you were in the old days. In the old days, I think you had a reasonable shot of writing a paper that's well-reasoned, well-researched, giving it to policymakers and decision makers and having it done. It doesn't work like that now. You've got to understand the media. You've got to be over at MSNBC and Fox. You've got to be out there slugging away with the point counterpoint. And I think you'd have to interact with those overseas as well. So I think that's one of the notable things about where I think the London Center is going and what I'd like to see us do. Bud McFarland was the leader of our delegation, just a tremendous gentleman. He was able to lead our very diverse delegation through a number of very sensitive meetings. And let me tell you something right up front. We were not necessarily welcome because there is a perception, a reticence, if you will, about dealing with Americans if you're part of the government, our government. And the reason being is that there is a real prevailing feeling that you, the Americans, supported the Brotherhood to the point of where you almost allowed Egypt to fall into a radical scheme of governance. That is the way they feel. So there was a number of meetings where we were actually yelled at. One of the meetings I won't have time to get into.
It's true.
One of the meetings I won't be able to have time to get into is one of the youth leaders who actually worked on this petition. You probably heard about last summer. There was a petition filed calling for Morsi to have early elections. 22 million people. 22 million people signed this petition. This student leader who did the petition yelled at us saying, "What is wrong with you people? Why did you side with why did you take sides? And why did you take the side of the Muslim Brotherhood?" So it was very notable. And we actually went around and talked to a number of key leaders. Again, I won't have time to go through all of them tonight. So I'll go through a couple of key ones that we talked to. Muslim, a true statesman. He was in charge of the committee to rewrite the Constitution. Now, I have a copy of the Constitution here. And we'll make it available if anybody wants, and I can email it to you, I had it scanned. And it's bigger than the last one. And there's a couple notable things about the Constitution that he was able to fix. First, I think we all recognize there was no impeachment process, which they've fixed. There was no way to basically take a sitting president out. Think about it, I mean, you know, it became a big point after a certain point. And then he led this committee through a very difficult time. Now, one of the other notable things, I want to say this right up front, because I'll be saying this a number of times tonight. The Muslim Brotherhood was invited to participate in the amendment process. They were invited. This is before they were outlawed as a terrorist organization. So they were said, hey, come on back to the table and walk through it. Some of the sophilists who were as almost extreme as the Brotherhood did show up to participate. So they did have what they thought was a good group to go through it. This is something for a lot more debate and discussion, more than we can go through tonight, but I'd be happy to entertain additional discussions on this topic. Now, the new Constitution, while it says it kind of goes along with Sharia, makes huge departures from the Morsi-approved Constitution. And reason being is that I think what people recognize that the Constitution approved by the Muslim Brotherhood wasn't going to be effective in recognizing some rights of people who we in our culture are very close to. The Christians, the minorities, women, as well as the Jewish. These were all folks who were essentially left out of the last Constitution. They're included. And His Excellency, Mr. Morsi, actually told me that we're very proud of the fact we actually included midgets as a protected group in our Constitution. Way to go. So it's notable, and let me, again, we had a full hour with him. We were able to go through and have a very good detailed discussion of all the things that they expect. Now, one of the things that obviously any document such as the Constitution, our Constitution, is not perfect. If you look back at how long it took us to get our governance together, it took more than a few years. We started out with Articles of Confederation, ended up with with the Constitution that we have now, and everything seems to work, the Bill of Rights and everything else. It wasn't something that happened in a number of months. So I think it's pretty remarkable that they've been able to essentially come out of essentially a form of a dictatorship and move forward to this point in time. So it's notable that they had the referendum a few days ago. It was the 14th and 15th of January. And I have a few stats here I just want to go through. I don't usually like stats, but I think it's important to note that this was a very significant victory. The Constitution he drew up was voted on by approximately 22 million Egyptians. And this is a country of about 90 million. Out of that 90 million, I think 38 million are of age or qualified to be voters. So the fact you have 22 million of that 38 million is pretty good. And this vote was bigger. The people who turned out were bigger for this vote than the first vote for the Constitution the Muslim Brotherhood put forth, as well as the Constitution before that, the referendum on the Constitution right after Mubarak. So it was notable that this was a higher percentage of turnout, higher number of folks turned out. So I think that's a good sign. And 98% of the Egyptian population approved. 98%. Now, I monitored this pretty closely. I don't think that's padded. I met with one of the guys I can't go into next, we don't have time, is I met with the Minister of Information, who was actually trying to encourage people just to come out and vote. Don't take a side, just come out and vote. And this is where I get a little bit annoyed by the U.S. media talking about, oh, the Army's been suppressing people from going. It's like, no, the Army was out en masse on the day of the election to prevent the Muslim Brotherhood from interfering with people coming to vote. Now, this is one of those things which you have to actually check the source, look at what's going on. And I was telling her earlier today coming in, CNN is taking up the water of the Muslim Brotherhood. They had one guy who was from the Peace and Justice Party, who was really Muslim Brotherhood, who was complaining that the military is suppressing everybody, that, oh, they forced everybody to vote for this Constitution. From what I saw, I did not see people being forced to vote for anything. They were given a choice. They did keep tight reins on this up until the very end. We had a copy of this before the Egyptian people saw it, a full 3 weeks ahead of time, because they didn't want the Muslim Brotherhood getting a copy and trying to basically put things in there that were false to manipulate basically an uprising against the Constitution. So I think they did it the right way. And I think they do have a workable Constitution. Again, is it perfect? No, it is not perfect. But I think it's a step in the right direction. Next up in their political system are two key events which are going to follow the Constitution. First off, they're going to have a presidential election at some point. and then they're going to have a parliamentary election. Now, what's notable about the parliamentary election is the fact that they've actually done set-asides, I guess this is my word, not theirs, to make sure that a certain percentage of those elected are of minorities. 25% of the electorate of the parliament must be women for the first time. Now, I'm not a big fan of forcing on, yeah, I hate to say it, but I think in this case it may be useful to actually encourage to have minorities participate. And by the Constitution, by the way they've done it, they're going to have that. And then, on top of that, as they start electing these politicians in, I think you're going to see a much more representative group of parliamentarians than in the last Congress. And then the presidential election is coming up too. Right now, it's not clear what they're going to do first. They have not decided if they want to have the parliamentary elections first or the presidential elections first. There's good and bad issues that come with both. And not just cut to the chase, now Field Marshal al-Sisi has been declared to be a candidate or be eligible to be a candidate by the Supreme Army Council, Military Council escape. And the chances are pretty good he's going to run. And I think most people recognize that General al-Sisi, Field Marshal al-Sisi, if he runs, will probably be the winner. I'm not here to comment on that. We can debate that a little bit later, but that's what I see happening next. But notably, again, we had some good time with him, and the Constitution, I believe, is a living document. It's going in the right direction, and it will actually do a lot to recognize the minorities. And while I'm on this real quick, a good friend of mine, Bruce Fine, and I spoke about this. Bruce is a constitutional attorney. One of the necessary steps of having international investment, one I think we don't necessarily understand or internalize. I'm not a businessman, I wouldn't have thought about this, but many businesses want to know that the legal system within the country they're investing in or working in has the ability for recourse. That is to say, if something goes wrong, you want to be able to trust that your grievance will be identified and worked appropriately legally. This is a step in the right direction. Establishing good governance through a constitution, I believe, is a necessary first step to reestablishing a framework, an environment for businesses to invest. And I'm going to talk about the investment issue a little bit later. So this is something I think that, again, is very much necessary for the economic well-being and long-term stability of the region, to have good governance, and I think this is clearly a step in the right direction. General Mohammed Farid al-Tohami, very interesting gentleman. We spent 4 hours one-on-one with him, and he is a mentor of Field Marshal al-Sisi. He is quite a man who understands military, understands intelligence, and there's several things, notable things he talked to us about during the time there. First off, during this meeting, and I'm going to put it right out there because he kind of put it out to us, he had just met with John Brennan, our director of CIA, about 3 days before he saw us. And he opened up, General Tohami actually opened up saying, we don't understand why you're supporting the Brotherhood. We consider them a terrorist organization. And notably, this is something I'd like you all to internalize again. I'm hitting the press pretty badly on this, but I think it's something notable. He said, we, the Egyptians, do not consider the Brotherhood an Egyptian organization. They are internationally funded. And while he wouldn't say it, Qatar has been one of the sources of funding for the Brotherhood. And if you note, I'll get it out of the way, there's 20 journalists being held right now by the Egyptian government who all worked for Al Jazeera, which is from Qatar as well. So I would be speculating only to think of why they arrested those journalists, but I think it has something to do with the Qatar support for the Brotherhood. I'll just leave it at that for now. Anyway, he said, look, one of the things that you have to understand about the Brotherhood is that they are internationally funded. We do not consider their activities in Egypt to be our issue. It's an international issue. And with that said, he said, I brought up this issue to John Brennan when he was here. And I talked to him about the Brotherhood. Well, he didn't say much more about the conversation, other than to say, at one point in time, this is Tohami talking to us, at one point in time I asked John Brennan, why is it you won't declare the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization? And I think it was a valid question, one that would you want to know. Anyway, so he didn't tell us the answer. We had to go to lunch before we actually got a chance to ask him about it. So, good friend of mine, Spider Marks, during lunch said, General, with all due respect, you mentioned you talked to John Brennan about the Muslim Brotherhood. What was his answer? Tohini got stiff, I mean visibly stiff. And he sat back, put his hand on the table, he says, he laughed at me. Now think about that. Think about it. This is the director of their intelligence system being laughed at by our director of CIA over a valid issue relating to their domestic terrorism problem being created by an international terrorist organization. Now, I'm an intelligence officer. I would never laugh at a fellow intelligence officer over an issue that he's having. That's number one. Number two, do we really wonder now why the Egyptians hate our White House? This arrogance that was demonstrated in that one little vignette that I think tells me everything I need to understand about why relations right now are really bad. Notably, he kept his cool during this meeting, but I think he deserves an answer from John Brennan. But apparently, a laugh is all he could get out of him. So I think that's not a good thing. So he talked a number of things about that I think notable for the purpose of our discussion. He got a question from one of the folks in our party about Libya. He says, do you have a problem with refugees from Libya? And he said, no, it's the other way around. It's like, well, how's that possible? He says, we can't get the 3 to 4 million Egyptians who are running Libya to go back in. It's too chaotic. Your policy screwed up the region. What were you thinking? So he was arguing that our policy of removing Gaddafi destabilized the region to the point of where they can't get Egyptians who are working in Libya, making a good living, keeping the country going, won't go back. He says, oh, by the way, speaking of Libya, militants, we have all these weapons coming out of Libya now that we can't control. It's making our life far more difficult. All these weapons, he said, oh, and I'm going to give you an exact quote here. I couldn't knock me over with a feather when he said it. This policy of yours to get weapons from Al-Qaeda radicals in Libya and put them on a boat and send them to Turkey to ship them to pro-Al-Qaeda rebels in Syria, that's a bad policy. So Bud McFarlane and I lock eyes like, oh my God, how does he know this? It's supposed to be a secret. Apparently it's no secret to them. Anyway, so and the other thing, I'll close off, and the last point he made to us, he says, I'm a Muslim. I'm a devout Muslim. And I don't understand how you all decided to side with these extreme Muslims called the Muslim Brotherhood. He says, it's notable, and there's some debate about this we've had amongst ourselves. According to General Al-Tahimi, there's only 800,000 to 900,000 Muslim Brotherhood in our country. Completely devoted, hardcore. And somehow you want them to be the ones who dominate 90 million people? This is a question he asked us. So he just was kind of asking us questions like, what were y'all thinking? And so it's very clear that from the policy perspective, he's unhappy with what's happened. I'm sure he reflects, his thoughts reflect on General al-Sisi or Field Marshal al-Sisi because he's a mentor. And again, it showed to us as a delegation that there's real problems with our policy, U.S. policy regarding Egypt. Let's go through a few other issues. I want to keep going here. 90 million people, they are the largest Arab country, largest population. And I spend a lot of time up at night watching late night TV. And not that I can understand it because it was all in Egyptian, but it was very interesting. A lot of their old shows are like I Love Lucy looking. They're the very Western. Nobody wore burqas, no one wore the headscarves. They were very Western. And their inclination is to be Western. They really like culture, And not to say that everybody's Western, I'm not saying that. They have a huge problem with economics, which we'll talk about in a second, but they really want to be democratic. And I think they're going to take a shot at it. Will it be perfect? No. Will it result in a strong man coming back in, potentially in the form of al-Sisi? Maybe. But it's still better than the Brotherhood being in charge, and I'll talk about that in a second as well. Good governance. I talked about that a little bit when I talked about Amr Mosa. We need to have a system which the people not only rely upon who live there, who believe that there will be some level of justice or something that there's a hope for them regarding economy. It's important for economic development and transitional growth relating to people coming in and doing things. One of their big projects is something called the Suez Canal Project. I'll talk about that here in a few slides. Mainstream media reporting, and I'm being polite, tainted and inaccurate, I would say they're in the tank. Again, I was doing some reading on the train coming up here today. Christian Amanpour was taking the side of the Muslim Brotherhood completely. Now, CNN already has bad bad viewership. I can just see that they've got 10 people in some room thinking that that's the reality in Egypt right now. Catch-22 and the coup d'etat. Boy, I don't speak French well, sorry. One of the first meetings we had before we went on this adventure was actually at the embassy the Egyptian embassy residence in Washington with the ambassador and the military attaché. And they said, they pulled out, and this is in my report, they pulled out this congressional language, appropriation language that said basically, you, the Egyptian military, to sustain funding from us, the Americans, you must be able to fulfill treaty obligations, and there's a number of things they had to do. This is in our law. And so Admiral Aziz, the attaché, looked at me and says, we had a choice to make. This is partly something that you all need to be concerned about. A point in time came, in last year, in 2013, where President Morsi directed us to stop treaty support, to stop looking for tunnels. So we had a choice to make. Do we actually fulfill the treaty obligations, which we know to be right and proper to do, because that's what we signed up to do, it's our obligation, and we clearly still would like to have the funding, or do we go with what President Morsi said to do, stop supporting the treaty? We had a catch-22. So he basically said, put it back on us, what would you have done? Would you have stayed with the madman, seeing your country degrade, going into the ground, or would you have taken action? And ultimately, they decided on what some people call a coup. I don't know if I still don't think it was a coup because it was popularly led. A 22 million person petition was signed on the 30th of June last year calling for early elections. 22 million. And the military, having had these other problems with President Morsi regarding the treaty obligations, actually came in and said, President Morsi, you need to look at this. You need to have early elections. And you've got 3 days to decide. Thank you, have a good day. We'll come back in 3 days if you and see what you want to do. And Morsi just said, no, I'm not going to have elections, and that's why he was arrested on the 3rd of July.
Okay.
So, was it a coup d'etat? I say no. I get a lot of pushback. One of my professors from college basically said I was a total idiot for believing that, but you know.
It's a university professor.
And he's a liberal too. He's a dear friend, but he's still a liberal. So. Anyway, economic development, Suez Canal Project. This is something I've done a lot of research on. I think is something any business people in the audience should think about. I'm going to go through the canal in a second. This is hugely important not only to the region, with the stability of Egypt, but for the world economy. There's a ship called the Triple E, Maersk just built. Huge container ship, biggest ship in the world. It can go through the Suez Canal. So it's not just us who has to worry about the Suez Canal. I'm going to go through the canal in a second. And they're a military war. Over the time we were there, they suffered at least a dozen casualties. The next trip, by the way, we're supposed to go back, and I don't want to go into details right now because it's all kind of sketchy. We're going to go back. The idea is we're going to go up to the front with them, this time up to the Gaza area. And they're a military war. This is the meeting engagement of the war on terror. This is it. The Muslim Brotherhood has been a recruiting mechanism for Al-Qaeda for years. So as much as I think tactically we've had successes as the U.S. military, they've always been able to regenerate. And it's like we don't have a strategy for dealing with that regeneration. We have been great at tactical, we have not done well at strategic. I think we need to sign it and work with the Egyptians because they are the ones at the front line of the war on terror. And as I said, the Muslim Brotherhood is the issue. I already did the director CIA story. There's real issues here that we have to look at that are not pretty. But the Muslim Brotherhood is not an Egyptian problem, it is our problem. Because on the long-term scale of things, if we don't deal with the Muslim Brotherhood there'll be other things regarding economic and political consequences all around the world. So I think right now is the time they declared the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. I think we ought to think about doing the same thing. Libya, a lot of frustration there. It's not going to go back to the way it was anytime soon. It is not a democracy. One of the things that General Tahami told us is that the black flag of Al-Qaeda flies over Tripoli. And that the Muslim Brotherhood and other radical elements now control Benghazi. So that's real progress there. There's been a 60% uptick over the past 2 years in acts of terror in that region. 60%. This just came out of the conference in Morocco. 60%. So think about, I mean, and he's saying, he said it's all because of our policy.
He's right.
And he's right. Military, one of the concerns that the media here keeps talking about is special, you know, oh my God, the military has special status. They do. They're like Turkey, they're like Pakistan. The American media has to understand that unlike our military controlled by civilians, theirs is not. It's just the way it is. Our State Department has a really hard time dealing with this, and I think that's one of the reasons the State Department has a hard time doing things, because they just don't accept that. That's one of the reasons I've recommended strongly that we go back with the military leadership going back over to this. So we're working on that right now. Root cause analysis, I've mentioned this already. This whole duty to protect thing, you've all heard about it. Duty to protect. Samantha Powers and Susan Rice have all talked about this. It is insane. One of the things notable about this duty to protect, if you come in and help someone destabilize that region, and if this organization you're helping to protect is not sufficiently able to throw off its government or the people that are suppressing it, then you have to stay there to help them govern after they take over. Do we really? We've seen that did not work out well in Iraq, not work well in Afghanistan. So we need to start thinking of these things more than simply these do-gooder causes. And that's the whole reason I believe that we have chaos. By the way, real quick on this, I'm going to move out of here real quick. The whole thing with Benghazi, with the idea that Gaddafi was coming in to cleanse, ethically cleanse, complete fabrication. There was no intelligence that ever indicated that. He was going in to clean house on one of the tribes who we felt was rising up against him. That's not ethnic cleansing. It would have never been ethnic cleansing. So that was complete lie by the administration. Well, that's a story for another day. I mentioned the 60% increase in terrorism. They have a commitment. They're going after these guys. We need to fall in with them. And I think there's some things we can do, London Center, with Congress and others, to actually facilitate working with them. They're an ally. They want to do this. We should work on it. And again, key to long-term stability is economic growth and prosperity. Let's run through this real quick. Here's a demographic I want to throw up regarding population and density and that sort of thing. It's a desert, and everything that they do is regarding the population is primarily around water. And I think that's something that's considered. Obviously, the Nile Delta, Suez Canal are all areas that we have to be worried about. Now, 90 million people in a very confined area of space relating to the water. And this is both an opportunity and a problem by the fact you have such population density, and they don't have a 2% problem, they have a 1% problem. And I was talking to some of the rich folks in Cairo, and they said, look, ultimately, we've got to find a way to bring enrichment to all the people of Egypt. And I think that's clearly what they want to do. This is not about the 1%ers trying to maintain 1%. This is about trying to find a way to bring prosperity in. And they have some ideas to do that. Again, for another briefing, we can go through that. And I love these shots. It just gives you a sense of the planet, of what's going on. And of course, when you look at this, one of the reasons I want to bring this is what's over here. Right. Pretty damn close. So this is why this is so important. 90 million people next to our best ally in the region. Think about that. It's pretty important. And in the end, another good shot of that area. And of course, the Suez Canal going into Egypt, to Europe. So these are all things that we have to consider that I don't think that we're actually being mature adults as we internalize and debate the issues regarding Egypt. This is one of the trade routes which I mentioned, the Triple E. Maersk was designed to actually do this. The Maersk is this Triple E ship, the McKinley-Moller, the largest ship in the world, is so big it can't go through the Panama Canal, cannot even come to a U.S. port. But this is important to the rest of the world. This is where it travels. And that actually gets to the Suez Canal. So I just wanted to talk about long-term consequences. All right, we don't have time to go through this right now, all of it. But the Suez Canal has a long and rich history. I'm not going to go into history lessons. This is not a history lesson. So, but the reason I put this up here is that there's been fights over the Suez Canal since it was first conceived, going way back. And this is all stuff, you guys can have copies of the brief. But this is one notable. The canal was actually shut down. It was blocked by Egypt. For years, 8 years took it to get cleaned out. Now think about the consequences of something like that happening again. Do we really think the Muslim Brotherhood, with their backs to the wall, wouldn't do something like that? They don't care about the Egyptian people, they don't care about the economy, that was clear what they were doing. So, we have to consider the consequences of another major... Plug my computer. Say I planned ahead. So, guess who led the clearing after the war? We did. We actually had to come back in and clean it all out. So again, I'm just kind of thinking here. I'm not saying it'll happen again, but man, if we don't think about this stuff, it could. Does anybody know that the admiral who led the effort to do this? McCall. And we had some help from the Egyptians, U.S., Britain. I mean, we all kind of cooperated together, but it took years. It took years to reclaim that as a waterway. And again, the devastation to the people of Egypt and limiting factors to our own economy played out badly for everybody during that time. So, is our White House in the middle of a game of chicken? Do they not understand the consequences of bad policy? Think about it. I mean, 60% uptick in terror. Al-Qaeda's on its haunches. We're winning. I don't think so. And I don't know what data the White House is looking at. And I don't know what issues they're looking at. And one of the notable things is I was at a liberal event, don't tell anybody, a few days ago, where they were talking about John Podesta coming in to be the new man of the White House to get things fixed. You know his first priority? The environment, global warming. So we're talking about real issues here, and they're worried about global warming. It does not, I mean, am I missing something? Isn't this pretty important? Isn't our ally, the Israelis, the Egyptian well-being, our global economy, these are all kind of important. I'm just a lieutenant colonel. I don't know these things well, but I got a suspicion. So, conclusion. We need to have a real strategy for the region. We don't. We have chaos. Zinni observation, real quick. Tony Zinni, one of my mentors, said we don't have a global strategy. Back in the Cold War, we had a real global strategy. People who are leading are not. Dr. London, you didn't want me to say anything good about him, so I'll limit what I say good about him. Dr. London is the kind of guy who worked in the Reagan White House during one of our most challenging times during the Cold War. Part of the issue I now see is that people like him are not in. They're out. We're all out. And that's one of the things that's notable here. We need to have people like him figuring this stuff out, because the rocket scientists right now in the White House are not. And we need to, and if the White House can't do it, we should. The outreach and engagement with allies, the Egyptians want to talk to us. I can't go into all the details, but I was going back and forth with Egyptian generals today. They want to have a dialogue. They actually want to do things which will enable us to understand each other better and work more closely together. And I think we need to form an action plan with or without the White House. And we need to look realistically at the enemy. One of the things during the Cold War, Andy Marshall and the Office of Net Assessment did a really good job of looking at the Soviets. And we have not done that. Again, over the past 12 years, we have had tremendous success in tactical victories over Al-Qaeda. Most of the time, 98% of the time, we will kick their butt if we face them one-on-one or in some situation. But strategically, we haven't, with 60% uptick in terrorist acts in North Africa, we haven't won the strategic victory. We have to start looking at that. And notably, all the information that the Egyptians give our State Department somehow doesn't end up in Congress. Congress is ultimately our country's board of directors. And if your board of directors is being left out of the loop of what's going on, there's a real problem. So there's Spider Marks with McFarland and me, and here, I love this picture, by the way. See, there's a guy over here. I didn't even notice at the time I took the picture. A little guy talking to his wrist over there. I guess they're okay. So that's the Altair Square. So it was a great adventure. I was honored to be included. I'm honored to be working with Herb on this. I think this is a key issue of our time. I don't know how y'all feel about global warming. I'm part of my degree. My dual major was environmental studies in college, so I understand, I think, the environment, but I don't think environment's the biggest issue when we're faced with things regarding this. My 30-second assessment, I think they're on the right track. I think we need to go back and talk to them more. I think we need to help Congress understand. And as Herb has already had me do, I'm already working the media aspects of this. One thing I want to do is I brought this back from Egypt for Herb. Herb, if you come up here a second. This is something I brought.
This is all over house, by the way.
Yes, I brought this back from Egypt for Herb, and this is an obelisk. Oh, and this is our first little trinket from one of our overseas adventures. So.
Thank you very much indeed.
So.
Tony, I want to give this audience an opportunity to engage you in conversation. Clarify a couple of things that we're going to do at the London Center, because as Tony pointed out, this is an attempt to be a can-do center. So one, we are going to put together a red team to look at the Muslim Brotherhood, what they stand for, what they're trying to do, and the extent to which they've penetrated American channels of influence. The second thing that we're going to do is attempt to influence the Congress, putting together a bipartisan group within the Congress that will look at the whole question of where is American foreign policy going and what are we doing about Egypt. And the third thing we're going to do is put together a media campaign, and Tony has already been remarkable in putting together programs for MSNBC, Fox, and a variety of other places. The red team will include people like Wally Ferris, who is one of our senior fellows, Alan West, who is one of our senior fellows, Claire Lopez, who writes for us as well. So we are looking for allies. We're very much interested in the questions that we want to address. So this is what Tony has suggested is very clearly a strategy for us, a strategy on how we're going to deal with the future. And one of the things that often comes up during the course of these deliberations is why is it the American government doesn't get it? And my dear friend Joe Schmuckler and I were in Senator McCain's office last week, and it was very interesting that the senators said something that I often hear from Hillary Clinton, and I've heard from the administration as well, when he said the Muslim Brotherhood has moderate elements that we can negotiate. Now, as Joe can tell you, I took exception to that notion, and I don't believe that that's true. I think that this is a terrorist organization. But there are so many who believe that the only way to maintain stability in North Africa is through the Muslim Brotherhood. And that view has had a profound effect on the way in which people think about the Muslim Brotherhood and our relation, the American relationship to that organization. They overlook the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood is the recruiting organization, the brains and the money behind al-Qaeda. So on the one hand, as Tony quite appropriately mentions, we fight against al-Qaeda, win tactical victories, but on the other hand, we're supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. It doesn't make any sense. So again, I thank you very much for being here tonight. This is your opportunity to ask Tony questions, and we are very, very eager to have your support. You're
Well, first, you say whether something was a coup or not. It immediately came to me, you should ask Bill Clinton, because he's a world-renowned expert on what is. So he may, it's almost the same kind of debate. That's a comment. The question is, when I was at JP Morgan Chase in the 70s, late 70s, and there was a lot of euphoria, Israel gave, as you know, real estate and oil, and got some lukewarm peace. And David Rockefeller, who was the chairman of Chase at the time, had an initiative to do a free trade zone in Sinai when Israel, United States, would put some money, Egyptian, to really basically try to help the Egyptian economy. I believe they had 60 million people there. Now it's 90, on its way to 100. So it's a basket case economically. Has anybody talked again about let's get the Sinai to be something interesting, like a big Singapore?
Yeah, I wish I could go in a lot more detail. Yes, there's a Sinai enhancement project now that the government's proposing. Bud McFarland, Spider Marks, and I met with the individual. I have his contact information. He's one of the guys I want to engage. And they have a plan where the Egyptian government will actually invest in building infrastructure. Say if you want to be great manufacturing, they will build the infrastructure for you to build a plant. They just need to have something going. And there's, I think they told us 9 British companies who have made the investment. So this is something I would like to talk to folks offline about, but absolutely, I think there's clear interest in this. And they do want to move in this direction, absolutely. So, yes.
Joe, and then we'll get to John. And
Me first? Okay, yeah, just 2 quick questions. Great presentation. One, do you know if there were any international election observers in the election?
There was. I don't know. I can't tell you the makeup or the composition, but there was.
You didn't know that?
There were
Okay.
some.
That's number 1. Number 2, is there term limits in the new Constitution?
I'd have to go back and look at it. I don't know it that well.
All right.
That's a good question, though.
Thank you.
Yes, John.
John, and then Amanda.
Comment and question. The comment is, I would propose that in discussing whether it was a coup or not, that actually what it was a counter coup, and was popularly supported in response to an internal coup by the Muslim Brotherhood that tracked with astonishing exactness, fidelity is maybe a better word, the Nazi model from 1933. Because they had a substantial plurality. They combined with some other Salafist organizations. They changed the basic law, i.e. what passed for a constitution. And then they created this Sharia-based constitution they ran through against popular support. So the other thing is, I don't know if McCain understands this or not, probably not, or Graham, maybe Kelly Ayotte will. And that is that in reading Sharansky's book, please look and see that elections generally come toward the end of the process after you create a free society.
Right.
So the other point I make, what you said about, they're looking at global warming. The administration does that in everything, which is why Sarkozy at the UN a few years ago said, you want to look at what Iran and other countries are doing now about nuclear weapons and not looking about total disarmament. Now the question I have is, have you already done or are you considering, given that we have an administration that is not going to work with us, given that for a lot of reasons, and Herb talked about some of this at lunch about Congress where you have a lot of inexperienced staff members who don't have a background, of looking for allies in places like Canada and France, which have shown both some signs that, hey, we have to step up our efforts because America is going to be in a nap at least until January 20th, 1917 at 12 at noon. Have you looked into looking for those?
We haven't had time yet, but John, I would agree we should do that. I know that, speaking of global warming, I was listening to BBC today, and Europe, they were talking about Europe is now really tired of this whole global warming expense. So I think we can not only have allies from the perspective of they're tired of this global warming focus, I think there's other folks we can talk to, which I'm sure we can put in
But I was
strategy.
thinking with regard to Egypt.
Yes,
Show
absolutely.
signs.
Right.
I think the Harper government might be very inclined to hear this kind of briefing, and we intend to try and reach out to them. So yes, Amanda. Amanda, by the way, is the chairwoman of the Atlantic Bridge. And John.
A successor
Molstead.
organization.
And John Molstead, or I should point out, has a new book coming out on nuclear weapons, which is absolutely superb. I read an embargoed copy. And John will be addressing us in April.
Well, I was very delighted. I came in, I'm sorry, late, but to see that Spider was with you on this
Yes.
trip. But one of the...
He's one of the guys that actually paid attention to this.
Yeah. There's tremendous concern about the lack of a comprehensive foreign policy in this region among retired military.
Yes.
One of the people that I would think that it would be interesting for you all to engage, and I hope you would, is Jack Keane, who is very concerned about this, as is Stan McChrystal, and they're all, they're still in the area in Washington, D.C. So I think Jack was on television today, this morning, on Fox News, addressing specifically the perilous the perils that the U.S. faces from the absence of a comprehensive foreign policy, and I think that the centre could do much to engage those people and have them carry some of the water on this with you and join with you in this.
I'm in the green room all the time with Jack Keane. I can talk to Jack about it. And McChrystal was my boss in Afghanistan. We're friends on LinkedIn and we've talked, so I'm sure I can try to bring him in.
Well, I work quite closely with Stan.
Okay, well, I think I think
which is-
Stan would be a good guy because of the Afghanistan experience. Talking
Exactly.
And so I think that's a good idea.
I think it's a wonderful idea.
The one
Exactly.
thing I'll say about this is that Spider, and no kidding aside, we were the only three that actually did local Egyptian press. I'm not going to say the other names of the people on the thing, but there came a time where you had a choice between going to meet with the Egyptian and the media or going shopping. These are the only three guys that went to talk to the Egyptian media. I was very disappointed. Not throwing stones. But you've got to engage. If you're going to a country to engage, you need to engage, not go shopping for really nice trinkets.
You bought the obelisk.
I got that later. So, yeah.
Ruth is one of our board members, and a remarkable young lady.
Thank you. I like the young part particularly.
Hi, Ruth.
My understanding is very young.
I appreciate everything which you said about Egypt, and clearly it's about the only ally in the Arab world today. I do want to ask you, though, why didn't the Constitution include anything about the Copts? It's the largest population of Christians in the world. There's an international Copt organization. They are being butchered all over the world, and this Constitution specifically omits mention of the Copts.
It mentions the Christians, and I think, I understand what you're saying. We met with a Coptic Christian leader, one of the evangelicals, sorry. I'm out of drink. Anyway, he feels comfortable, and we had a long discussion. Again, it's another individual I didn't have time to go through tonight. We had a long talk about what's going on with the Christians there. They feel comfortable with this. They feel very, I mean, you and I can talk offline, I'll give you the information, you can contact them directly. The Copts feel comfortable with this. Now, the larger global issue, that may be something we can talk about once this is set up and sustained. And again, this Constitution is considered a living document. I asked Mimosa directly, it's like, do you consider this a done deal, or will you say, no, we consider this a living document. So don't consider my comments about the Constitution or their view of the Constitution as locked. I think there's all room for growth. We're going back. We're going to continue this dialogue, and I'm hoping this becomes a 2-year work to work with them, because I see it taking about 2 years, maybe more, to get this transition going. So I'm all for bringing this up when we go back.
Would you consider taking some prominent journalists, among them Yusuf Ibrahim, who are Copts in the United States and France? I think they would be, it would be an excellent move to ask these international Copts, there are many journalists in Canada, for example, to go on your mission, because that would go a long way in satisfying many of us who are still very iffy about, will it be a democracy or...
I'm with you. I was just over with a certain media organization right before this tonight, doing what you're talking about. Yes, we want to bring major media over. I'd like to continue this dialogue with you to talk about how we can do that.
I'd love that.
I wanted to just bring one point to your attention when Joe and I met, and Ellie, by the way, who's organized all of our events in Washington, who's the vice president of this organization, met with the senator. He said he was very much concerned about members of the NGOs who had been arrested and detained. And I said we would look into it. And Tony, in fact, is doing that.
Right.
And I think that is a valid point that the senator was making, and something that we're very much concerned about. Are there people who represent non-Muslim Brotherhood activities who are also being arrested and persecuted? And we certainly want to find out about it and do what we can. So this is an opportunity for us to play a role in the shaping of this government. We're very excited about that possibility. But from my point of view, one of the central features of all of this negotiation is the fact that we can play a role in creating a safe border for Israel on the southwest side. And that means so much to me and should mean a lot to Americans. Yes, sir. Sorry, Ambassador.
I've been engaged for a long time with Egypt. And I happen to be one of the people who negotiated, signed the peace treaty with Egypt, 79 and 80. The question is, I think there are going to be always revolutions, always, every few years, as long as the economic situation will not improve dramatically, unemployment, literally starvation, vis-a-vis the multiplication of society. I know that over $30 billion the United States invested in Egypt in the last 30 years, maybe more, maybe $2.3 billion annually. But it was always done through the governments. It was given to Sadat, to Mubarak, etc. The question is any thinking and strategy developing to invest it for private companies, American, Egyptians, others, European, Israelis too, because the only way that the revolution cycle will ever stop is through improving the economy in a real way, giving people employment. Otherwise, we can discuss here anything we want. And we have been doing it in Israel a lot. It won't help. So I think this is the key question, and I wonder if anything that was done, what was negotiated, or what did you face there doing it?
Well, as I mentioned.
I'll tell you only one thing. Sorry. When I negotiated with the Egyptian, Zakaria Mukhyadin told me very clearly, they're not going to be real peace with Israel until two conditions we met. One, solving the Palestinian question, and number two, solving our economy, or number one and number two. And you know that he was an advisor to Sadat, Nasser, and I met him. So, and I remember it, and I think we haven't solved the problem until today. And I wonder if anything is being done about it, because that's the key issue.
The answer is the Suez Canal project, which I didn't have time to get into. There is a specific project that the government is now working on, or the enticement of investment to come in to build manufacturing capacity to employ people. The actual plan is something maybe we could do a follow-on to, because I need to go back and learn more about it. They want to actually not only upgrade the Suez Canal to make it viable for ships to go through, but also make it essentially a zone of investment and commerce, where you have manufacturing that can easily get on the waterways and out of the country. They're actually trying to do that. As I mentioned, the Egyptian government is willing to build the capacity, build the factories. If you have a company that wants to invest, we're willing to build the area for you to come in and work. And the idea would be, obviously, it's a private investment helping employ Egyptians. And I think the people I spoke to, who were clearly rich, who supported our trip, were saying, we recognize that we, the 1%, can't live like this. We have to essentially find a way to bring, prosperity to all the Egyptian people for long-term stability. So there is a group of people who understands that. The question now becomes, can this government allow it to happen? As you mentioned, in the past, it's always been pushed off somewhere else. But I'm hopeful as democracy they can do that.
Yuri, I'd look to you making an essential point, a point that's been made many times in the past. The economic situation in Egypt is desperate. The unemployment rate for those people under 30 is on the order of 45%. So they're finding employment for young people is critical. And there's no doubt that there's an enormous challenge ahead. The Suez Canal project that Tony makes reference to will be a free trade zone.
Yes.
There will be an opportunity to bring private capital in. That's the goal. The government will play a role, but the goal is to bring private capital in. The problem that the Egyptian military government will have is how do you feed this population? It's not an easy question to answer. You've got 90 million people to feed. You've got so many who are unemployed. You've got desperation on the streets. That's why you have revolution. So you're right. In order to maintain stability, something is going to have to be done in this quarter. The Saudis, interestingly, have been paying the bills. The United States pays a part. The Saudis have been playing a very big part. And also, interestingly, the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Turks, who have been allies of the United States, now have their own foreign policy. They can no longer rely on the United States. The rapprochement with Iran had led to a tectonic change in the Middle East. You've got a new Middle East, entirely new. And the role that Egypt will play becomes critical.
Yes.
So when we look at this map and look at the future, Egypt becomes a central player. It's the most populous Arab state in the world, and it is also located in a key place, and it also could serve as a model for other Arab nations. So I'll leave you with that. Roy,
Two more real quick.
Hi, Roy Murdoch, a senior fellow at the London Center. Comment and question. The comment is, I've written out about this issue, and I don't use the term military coup. I say the military excused Morsi from service. So I was in Egypt, I believe June 16 to 18, right, more or less, about 12 days before the popular uprising that led to Morsi's excuse from service. And I talked to a number of Egyptians, and I heard a lot of dissatisfaction with the Muslim Brotherhood's economic performance.
Yes, absolutely.
Much less concern about the Islamo-fascism or Islamic fundamentalism, what have you. So do you think the popular uprising was a rejection of their economic management or mismanagement, or did it involve rejection, excuse me, of their fundamentalist Islamist approach?
I think that the economic woes, which were getting worse, was the final straw for the Muslim Brotherhood. The way it was explained to me by one of the student leaders is like, everybody wanted to give the Brotherhood a chance. Everybody saw that the opportunity to let them do it. But when it became clear that they could not manage and create opportunity for most Egyptians, it was time for them to leave. And I think there's this what the media talks about, this nationalistic fervor that the military is no, I think it's the nationalistic interest of the Egyptian people is to eat. 20 million people are engaged in the tourism industry, and they saw that go away into the Muslim Brotherhood. So that's 20 million people right there who could have been on the petition, because they were basically not, you know, when we went to the pyramids, there was nobody there. So you're talking about, if you think about this, 22 million people signed a petition to get rid of Morsi. That's roughly the number who are involved in the tourism industry. So all the guys who basically felt they weren't adequately employed could have voted on that petition. So I think it's more economically, and I agree with the ambassador, I think that's why we have to really focus. I'm not an economist. I can do strategic assessments and military stuff, but this is clearly where we have to go for long-term stability.
It's one, just if I may make one other point. Morsi did engage in overreaching. He went to see Zawahiri in Pakistan. They didn't go there. He didn't go there to discuss pyramids. There was no question that he also went to see Khatemi in Iran, and he went there to discuss the possibility of the creation of an Iranian-supported state in the Sinai. So there was no doubt about Morsi's intentions. He had no intention, of course, of maintaining the peace treaty with Israel. So from an American standpoint, just from the strategic standpoint of the United States, this guy really should go. And I'm pleased, at least I can say this for myself, very pleased that we have a military government in Egypt.
And one last question.
Essentially, you covered it with the...
Okay, good.
But thank you.
Thank you.
Well, look, thank you very much. Please